And this is CiTR 101.9 FM and Stranded, the Australian-Canadian music show. Thanks very much for listening. This is a little feature on Steve Kilbey, continuing from last week. Steve Kilbey of The Church and side project Isidore. So I just played for you a track from the new Isidore release called Life Somewhere Else. Isidore is Steve Kilbey and Jeffrey Kane. Jeffrey Kane is American from a band called Remy Zero. So Jeffrey does the music and Steve the lyrics and singing. Beautiful release, this one, Life Somewhere Else. The track you heard was Some Reverse Magic. So last week we spoke about the release specifically, and I asked Steve also about his love of yoga, Bhakti yoga particularly, the yoga of devotion, and I highly recommend re-listening to that podcast if you're into yoga. Go to Google and type in OZSTRANDED, Oz Stranded. You'll get all the podcasts, including last week's Part 1 chat with Steve Kilbey. So I asked Steve first up about the artistic process and what he went through as a younger person to develop his unique vision. And of course, you just need a consistent inner focus for what you're doing. Like that requires so much, just focus. And actually, that was one of my questions then. I remember my friend Sarah said that you posted once, and I regret not reading it, something about, you posted online your little essay about the sort of the cocooning necessary for a young artist, like when you're starting out and necessary to lock down, get your thing together, what you're doing. Can you speak to that, about that necessary cocooning process and how it might have worked for you way back and what you still do to maintain that single-pointed focus?
I have always been lucky in that I grew up in Canberra, and when I grew up in Canberra in the 70s, it was the most boring place, and everybody there was only concerned with this kind of status, a very boring kind of status too, like where they were in the public service, and it was kind of very boring. And after I left school, I didn't have any friends, and I had a band, but because of that other thing we're talking about, I treated these guys badly and they kicked me out even though I was the singer. And so I kind of ended up, through much of my youth, being isolated. I couldn't find... If I'd been in Sydney, I wouldn't have had that one-pointedness. I would have been out... I would have been out running around, taking drugs or chasing girls or down at the beach. But in Canberra, I couldn't find... There were no drugs. There didn't seem to be any drugs, girls, and there certainly wasn't any beach. And I couldn't meet any like-minded people. So I kind of retired to my bedroom with my record collection and sort of obsessed about the records that I liked and obsessed over trying to learn to play bass guitar. And then later on, I got myself a 4-track machine, which was one of the first domestic 4-track machines ever available, which goes back to what we were talking about before. But once upon a time, even if you wanted to do a 4-track recording, you were talking about hiring some big place and having one of those guys in white coats like you see in the Beatles documentaries doing it all. And then you still couldn't get at it. Every time I'd been in these little home recording studios, I could never get at what I wanted to do because I always had to go through some guy. And if I didn't know exactly the right lingo, he was going to, oh, you mean echo, you don't mean reverb, and all this kind of stuff. Oh, no, you can't do that. No, we couldn't do that. So when I finally got that, I became really obsessed, and I spent all my life in a bedroom with a tape recorder and a couple of guitars, and in that way I kind of honed what I was doing and discovered who I actually was and sort of tried to drop all the influences and sort of become myself. But I think if I'd been living in Sydney or Melbourne, I don't think that would have happened. And the great advantage of that was when the Church first got in a studio in 1980 to make our first record. I'd already made that record. I'd already made it on my 4-track. I'd already done all the demos. I'd written all the songs, and I knew how everything was supposed to be. And if we would have gone under without any sign at all, if we'd just gone in that studio raw, because the engineer and producers, they didn't understand what I was trying to do. for example, I had this very simple thing. There were 2 guitars in our band, and I wanted them to be even all the time. And these guys, I remember sitting in there, actually, with my thumb on a fader, trying to put up what the engineer was calling the rhythm guitar. And I'm trying to push it up, and he's got his thumb on the other side trying to push it down. And I'm actually looking at this guy in the eye, pushing the thing. He's looking at me, and we're starting to, and he's trying to push it down. And I'm like, I know that I want... And he's going, but man, it's interfering with the solo. And I'm going, but that's what I want. I don't want to have a solo guitar. I want to have 2 guitars creating this ambience between them that I was getting at home by recording two different guitars and putting different effects on. And then that was happening with the church as well when we started up, when we had 2 guitars. And then in the studio, they were trying to stop that happening and do this whole thing like, this is a solo, so that means the other guitar has to go down. And, I mean, that was just one very basic example. And I learned how to double track my vocals, and I learned how to put just a touch of a keyboard in that you can't really hear behind a guitar to give it a kind of a sort of an ambient depth. Of course, when they heard the keyboards, we got to turn this right up. And I'm like, no, you're not supposed to hear that. What do you mean? Because it was 1980. People didn't, they're all a bunch of old idiots from the 70s were running the studios and producing and stuff. So, I really had to, I wouldn't have had the courage to fight for what I wanted if I had known on my own that it worked.
Right.
So that was that cocooning process, really learning all about all the tricks, even if it was just on a 4-track. It's a bit like sort of practicing on a Cessna and then getting in a 727 like those terrorists did.
Yeah.
It's like, it's sort of like, you practice on this small thing, but it's still got all the basic principles of when you get in the big studio, you know what to do. But up until then, these guys, they always... I've been in studios with bands before, and they always, these engineers and producers, they've never let you do what you wanted to do. They always thought they knew better. And of course they didn't. They were just... Otherwise they would have been musicians themselves, not just packs in the studio.
Yeah. So this is the second part of my chat with Steve Kilbey, and he just gave an illuminating description of his cocooning as a young artist in Canberra, the sort of process that he went through over the years that led to the intense vision that he still produces in his work. And I'm going to ask him a bit more about Canberra, and I mentioned up the top that I grew up there myself, Canberra, the capital city of Australia. I should add, just for completion, I grew up in Canberra as well, so I know exactly what that was like.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
I went to Marist College, so in the Woden Valley area.
In the Woden Valley, which suburb were you in?
Pierce.
Pierce? Well, you know what? I had a girlfriend in Pierce, and every time I went to visit her, my father used to say, that's an appropriate name, isn't it?
Oh, wonderful, yeah.
And my Uncle Ken Bennett still lives in Pierce.
Oh, wow.
He still lives in Pierce. So I know Pierce very well, just under the... And Peter Coppice is from Chifley, he was from Chifley. When we met, when he was 18 and I was 19, he was living in Chifley with his parents.
Ah.
So there you go.
In Western Creek, yeah. Well, yeah, literally. I mean, that's how I coped with going to an all-boys school and being cold all the time. I spent years listening to records, and I wouldn't be sitting... I wouldn't have this passion now if I hadn't done that, because I would have been doing something else.
There was something in the air that fostered... the people I knew in Canberra who were into music... I don't think I've ever met people in Melbourne and Sydney who had that same... Because there's always so many other things you can do in Sydney or Melbourne. But in Canberra, that was it. A record player, some records, and I used to drive over to Kingston, and there was a shop there that used to bring in the NMEs and the Melody Makers at the same time as England. You didn't have to wait for that 3-month lag.
Yeah.
So I was always 3 months... Of anybody I did know who was into music, I was 3 months ahead of them because I was actually reading NME as it came off the press last week. And so there was a real lag So the Sex Pistols would come out in England in December, but you wouldn't find out about it until April in Australia or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And were there any key concerts for you then, like bands that actually came through Canberra that just shook up the whole city, you know, like that you can remember? Like, I mean...
no, not really. I tell you, people always surprised when I say I saw Skyhawks.
Yeah.
At the Canberra Theatre, and they were amazing. In 1974, they blew my mind. They were so far... I used to hate that thing of... the Australian thing of, like, as epitomised by Billy Thorpe, like a guy with long hair and denim clothes would come on, crank up a loud guitar and play blues solos, you know. My baby left me, and I feel so bad. I hate that kind of fucking music. I hate that bluesy, rocky, rootsy, masculine stuff. So when Skyhawks came along and they were all kind of dressed up in weird costumes and playing this kind of very clever music with kind of... that was nothing to do with that, I was really knocked out by them. I saw Lou Reed at the Canberra Theatre, who was really disappointing. I saw Kraftwerk.
Wow.
I saw Tangerine Dream, who were amazing, who actually came out from behind their machines, and the three of them sat in deck chairs, drinking cups of tea, looking at the audience. And that was quite confronting for an audience in 1975. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
They're sitting in deck chairs, drinking cups of tea, looking at us, and the things are still going just like they were when they were behind them. So don't they have to play them or what? You know what I mean? So it was like a real, it's kind of situationist thing.
Yeah.
But, I went to England in 1978 and I saw bands in London that blew my socks off. Or they showed me... I saw a band called Japan, which was David Sylvian's band. I saw them play, and they did a few things that kind of really... They were doing these things that I was kind of getting to, where the bass line would remain the same. The bass line's kind of this busy melodic bass line that's playing the same thing, and then the music around it would start to ascend or descend. So you've got this fixed point in the middle staying the same, but as the music, as the guitars and the keyboards change around it, you sort of performs this trick where you feel like you can suddenly feel like you're falling through the floor, or you can feel like you're being elevated up higher and higher, and yet because one instrument's playing the same thing, you get this incredible tension every time. And I was just beginning to kind of play around with that in my home studio, that whole idea, which had never really occurred to me before, because when I first started writing songs, I thought, you know, when the guitar plays a C, the bass plays a C, and the organ plays a C, and everything, and then I started experimenting around and seeing other things. I was starting to sort of pick up the ways, the different kind of tricks that kind of rock music has up its sleeve, which I hadn't perceived up until then.
Sure, yeah. The church, I know you're on a bit of a hiatus. Marty's out in the forest somewhere in Sweden.
Yeah.
Is there any thoughts yet about the next steps, or...?
Marty's out in a forest. I hope someone doesn't think he's a moose, filling full of buckshot. I got a comment here. Oh, Stephen. What is the next thing for the church? We are on a bit of a hiatus. We've had a little bit of a kind of a disagreement over things, and but instead of talking it out, everybody just ran off. Everybody just ran off to forests, and Tim ran off to a forest too. Did Tim run off to a forest? I think Tim ran off to the coast.
Yeah.
Marty ran off to a forest. Peter ran off to his house up and his wife. Yeah. And I ran off to paint and record my solo album.
Oh yeah.
But no forest for me.
Okay. Well, okay. That's good. We can't all be there.
But I reckon this is the thing with the church. This is the thing. Although we don't really like each other much, although we've been together a really long time, and although we have lots of business disagreements, and we don't like the clothes each other wears and things each other said, we have something between us that will, I reckon, will pull us back together if somebody doesn't fall off their perch first. Because that's the danger with when guys get into their late 50s and you go sort of, oh, well, fuck you, I'm going to go and do something else for a few years. It's not like when you're 21 and 3 years later you come back and you're 24 and people go, okay, I've got that off my chest. It's like now we're getting this serious thing where heart attacks and cancers and stuff are like, so it's dangerous having these little things because that could be the end very easily. But if nobody dies of natural causes in the meantime, I think inevitably the church will be sucked back together like a kind of a black hole star pulling back into position because the attraction between us, the music that we can make together will always be better than anything we will kind of do on our own because we've been doing it for so long and we just have this amazing chemistry between us. And if you'd seen us on our last tour of America or our last tour of Australia, it was like 3 standing ovations every night.
I was there.
We just simply are one of the best bands in the world at what we do.
Absolutely.
And so I think that our own gravity will pull us back together, even though right now everyone is very disgruntled with everybody else.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you will be back, and I certainly look forward to it, Steve. And
yeah,
I really appreciate you finding time. It was wonderful to connect again. Yeah.